intrigued by paranormal phenomena and believed there might be more to the disappearance than met the eye. Armed with cameras, audio recorders, and EMF detectors, the five-person team set up camp near the old schoolhouse located at the center of town. Their first night passed uneventfully aside from occasional creaks and groans typical of old buildings settling under changing temperatures. On the second day, however, things took a darker turn. While exploring the basement of the church, Emily noticed strange markings carved into the stone walls. They appeared ancient yet somehow familiar, resembling symbols used in various cultures throughout history to ward off evil spirits. One symbol in particular caught her attention because she recognized it from her studies. It was associated with binding rituals meant to trap malevolent entities. That evening, the group gathered around their campfire, discussing their findings, when suddenly, all electronic devices stopped working simultaneously. Cell phones, flashlights, even the portable generator powering their equipment went dead. Panic began to spread among the students as darkness enveloped them completely. Then came the sound, soft at first, almost imperceptible, but growing louder with each passing moment. Footsteps echoed through the empty streets, voices whispered unintelligibly close by, and somewhere far off, a mournful cry pierced the night. Emily suggested retreating to the safety of their vehicle parked near the outskirts of town, but before anyone could move, something extraordinary happened. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement beyond the flickering flames of their fire. At first, she thought it was another shadow caused by tree branches swaying in the breeze, but then realization dawned upon her as figures emerged from the encroaching darkness. These weren't ordinary humans. Their forms shimmered faintly, translucent yet solid enough to cast distorted reflections in the dim light. Their faces bore expressions frozen in terror, mouths agape as though screaming silently. Some wore clothing dating back decades, while others appeared more contemporary. All shared one chilling characteristic: hollow eyes, devoid of any life or emotion. The students froze, unable to comprehend what stood before them. Were these truly the lost souls of Eldridge Hollow? And if so, why did they linger here, trapped between worlds? Before anyone could react further, one figure stepped forward, closer than the rest. Its presence radiated both sorrow and anger, emanating waves of cold that made breath visible in the already frigid air. The entity opened its mouth, and although no audible words reached their ears, the message became crystal clear inside their minds. "You shouldn't have come here." And with that ominous warning, the world around them began to shift. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, and the air grew heavier, pressing down on their chests as if an invisible hand sought to suffocate them. The once familiar landscape of Eldridge Hollow began to warp and twist, the outlines of buildings melting away like wax under a flame. Trees bent unnaturally, their branches reaching out toward the students with claw-like precision. The fire that had been their only source of warmth and light now flickered erratically, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. "What is this place?" muttered Kevin, the group's resident skeptic, his tone laced with fear. For once, he didn't try to rationalize the situation or dismiss it as a trick of the mind. I think we're seeing the truth behind Eldridge Hollow," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. These people didn't just disappear, they were pulled into something else entirely. As if responding to her words, the ground beneath them shifted again, this time splitting open to reveal a gaping chasm filled with writhing shadows. The spectral figures that had once been the townspeople now hovered over the abyss, their forms becoming less distinct, more amorphous. They reached out toward the students, their fingers elongating into sharp talons. "We must leave," urged another voice, this one different from the others. It carried a note of urgency, almost pleading. Turning toward its source, the students saw a figure standing apart from the rest, a young man with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that glowed faintly in the unnatural light. Unlike the other apparitions, he appeared whole and unbroken, though no less ethereal. Who are you? Emily demanded, taking a cautious step forward. My name is Daniel, he said, his voice clear despite the chaos around them. I was one of the last to fall victim to this curse. You must listen to me if you wish to survive. What curse? Asked Laura, clutching her arms tightly around herself as another wave of cold swept over them. Daniel hesitated, as though reluctant to share his story. Centuries ago, this land was sacred to the Native Americans who lived here. They performed rituals to protect it from evil forces that lurked beneath the surface. But when settlers arrived, they disrupted the balance, disturbing ancient spirits that had lain dormant for generations. Over time, those spirits grew stronger, feeding on the fear and suffering of those who crossed their path. He paused, his gaze locking onto each member of the group in turn. By the early 2000s, the town had become a prison, its inhabitants trapped between worlds. On October 17, 2018, the barrier finally collapsed, pulling everyone inside into this realm. Now, it seeks to claim new victims. But why us? Kevin asked, his voice shaking. We didn't mean to intrude. That doesn't matter. Daniel replied grimly. Once you stepped foot in Eldridge Hollow, you became part of its cycle. The only way to break free is to reverse the ritual that bound these spirits to the land. And how do we do that? Emily pressed, her heart pounding in her chest. Daniel gestured toward the chasm. Deep within that void lies the Heart of Shadows, a crystal formed from the concentrated hatred of the trapped souls. If you can retrieve it and destroy it, the curse will end, but beware, for the spirits will stop at nothing to prevent you from succeeding. Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled violently, throwing them off balance. The spectral figures surged forward, their cries of anguish turning into deafening roars. The chasm widened, spewing forth tendrils of darkness that wrapped around their legs, pulling them closer to the edge. Follow me, Daniel shouted, sprinting toward the nearest rock formation. If we can reach the heart, we might still have a chance. The students exchanged panicked glances before breaking into a run, their footsteps echoing against the cavernous landscape. Behind them, the spirits pursued relentlessly, their forms merging into a single, monstrous entity that towered above the plains. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and a guttural roar shook the very foundation of the world. As they ran, Daniel explained the layout of the realm, pointing out landmarks that would guide them toward the Heart of Shadows. Along the way, they encountered obstacles designed to test their resolve. Illusions meant to confuse them, traps hidden within the terrain, and moments of doubt that threatened to tear them apart from within. At one point, Kevin stumbled and fell, his ankle twisting painfully beneath him. "Leave me," he cried, tears streaming down his face as the shadowy tendrils crept closer. "Save yourselves." "No," Emily snapped, grabbing his arm and hauling him to his feet. "We're in this together, whether you like it or not." With renewed determination, they pressed onward, their bonds strengthening with every challenge they faced. When they finally reached the entrance to the chasm, Daniel warned them of the dangers ahead. The heart is guarded by the Spirit King itself, a being of pure malice and destruction. To defeat it, you'll need courage, strategy, and perhaps a little luck. Armed with makeshift weapons fashioned from rocks and sticks, the students descended into the depths of the chasm, their hearts pounding in unison as they prepared to face whatever lay ahead. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls shimmered with veins of black crystal that pulsed faintly, as though alive. And then they saw it, the Heart of Shadows, suspended in midair at the center of a vast chamber. It glowed with an eerie light, its surface etched with runes that pulsed in time with the students' own heartbeats. Surrounding it was the Spirit King, a towering monstrosity with multiple arms ending in razor-sharp claws. Its eyes burned with hatred as it regarded the intruders. "You dare to challenge me?" it boomed, its voice reverberating through the chamber. "Foolish mortals, your kind has caused enough suffering. Now you shall join them." Without hesitation, the students launched their attack. using every ounce of strength and ingenuity they possessed. Daniel coordinated their movements, shouting instructions as they dodged the Spirit King's assaults and struck back with everything they had. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, the chamber filling with the sounds of clashing metal, shattering stone, and anguished screams. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, Emily spotted an opening. With a final burst of speed, she darted past the Spirit King's defenses and drove her makeshift weapon straight into the heart of shadows. The crystal shattered instantly, releasing a blinding flash of light that illuminated the entire chamber. When the light faded, the Spirit King was gone, reduced to nothing more than wisps of smoke dissipating into the air. The chasm began to collapse, and the students scrambled to escape, their bodies battered and bruised, but their spirits unbroken. As they emerged back into the real world, dawn broke over Eldridge Hollow, bathing the abandoned town in golden light. The spectral figures that had haunted the area were nowhere to be seen, their souls presumably freed from their eternal torment. But as the students climbed into their vehicle and drove away, none of them dared to speak. They knew they had survived something extraordinary, but also that the memory of Eldridge Hollow would haunt them forever. And deep within the mountains, amidst the ruins of the old church, a single symbol remained carved into the stone, a warning to those who might come seeking answers. I listened to a radio broadcast from 1948, and something answered back. The discovery of the journals in Walter Hayes' abandoned farmhouse sent a ripple through the small town of Elmwood, Illinois. It was late March 2021 when two local teenagers, Jake Miller and Timmy Brown, stumbled upon the property while exploring on their ATVs during spring break. The house had been vacant for decades, its windows boarded up and vines creeping over the once white siding. Out of curiosity, they broke in through a rotted-out back door. Inside, the air smelled musty, carrying traces of mildew mixed with something metallic like old blood. Dust coated every surface, untouched by human hands for years. On the second floor, hidden beneath a pile of decaying newspapers from the 1950s, they found a locked wooden chest. Using a crowbar they'd brought along just in case, they pried it open to reveal stacks of yellowed notebooks filled with handwritten entries dated between 1947 and 1949. Walter's writings painted a chilling picture of his life as a radio broadcaster. He described strange occurrences in his studio, whispers emanating from the speakers when no one was transmitting, equipment malfunctioning at odd intervals, and, most disturbingly, voices answering him when he least expected them. One entry read, "Today, I asked aloud who was listening. A voice replied, 'We've always been here.' My heart nearly stopped." Jake and Timmy couldn't help but feel uneasy as they flipped through the pages. They snapped photos with their phones and decided to show the findings to Mr. Anderson, their high school history teacher, who often encouraged students to research local folklore. Little did they know, this decision would set off a chain reaction that connected them to Emily Carter across the country. Meanwhile, Emily's disappearance became national news. Investigators scoured her apartment, piecing together fragments of what might have happened. Forensic experts identified faint fingerprints on the charred remains of the radio, belonging to someone other than Emily. This unknown person appeared to have handled the device shortly before the fire started. DNA analysis revealed no match in any public database, leaving authorities baffled. In May 2022, a paranormal researcher named Dr. Margaret Langston arrived in Portland, drawn by the case's peculiarities. She specialized in studying anomalous technology and believed there might be more to the vintage radio than met the eye. After obtaining permission from the fire department, she reconstructed the damaged device using spare parts sourced from antique shops. When powered on, it crackled to life, playing static-laden music that sounded eerily familiar yet outdated. Dr. Langston noticed something unusual about the radio's internal components. Beneath the casing lay intricate wiring patterns resembling fractal designs rather than standard engineering blueprints. These patterns matched symbols sketched in Walter Hayes's journals, which had been published online after Jake and Timmy shared their discovery. Coincidence? Or evidence of a deeper connection? Back in Elmwood, Mr. Anderson organized a team of volunteers to search the surrounding woods near Walter Hayes's farmhouse. According to legend, these forests were home to the Whisperers, a group of mysterious entities said to communicate through sound waves. Some claimed they could hear voices in the wind, especially around midnight. Skeptical but intrigued, the group ventured out one moonlit night armed with recording equipment. At precisely 12:03 a.m., their microphones picked up a series of low-frequency tones followed by distorted words. Transcribed later, the message read, "Tell Emily we're waiting." Shaken, Mr. Anderson contacted Dr. Langston immediately, sharing the audio file via encrypted email. By July 2023, both parties realized they were dealing with forces beyond conventional understanding. Dr. Tamsist. Langston theorized that certain frequencies acted as gateways to alternate dimensions or timelines. She hypothesized that the radio served as a conduit, allowing communication between our world and whatever existed on the other side. But why target Emily specifically? And what role did Walter Hayes play in all this? As autumn leaves began to fall, tensions mounted among those involved. Each new revelation only deepened the mystery. In October, Dr. Terrian Langston received an anonymous package containing another journal entry written by Walter Hayes. This time, it detailed his final broadcast, the one Emily heard in 2018. At the bottom of the page, scrawled hastily in red ink, were 3 words. "They're coming for her." Now aware of the danger looming over Emily, Dr. Langston assembled a team including Jake, Timmy, and Mr. Anderson to locate her. Their search led them to a remote cabin nestled in the Cascade Mountains, where they believed she might have gone into hiding. As they approached the isolated structure under a starry sky, they couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched their every move. Inside the cabin, Emily sat alone, staring at the repaired radio sitting atop a rickety table. Its dial glowed faintly in the dim light, tuned once again to 612 kHz. The voice of Walter Hayes echoed softly through the speakers, repeating his now familiar call sign. But this time, Emily didn't respond. Instead, she waited patiently, knowing full well what awaited her next. And then, the door creaked open. A gust of cold air swept through the room, extinguishing the single candle that provided feeble illumination. Shadows danced wildly across the walls, as if reacting to some unseen force. Emily's breath quickened, though not out of fear. She felt strangely calm, almost resigned. Outside, the howl of the wind grew louder, blending with faint whispers that seemed to emanate directly from the radio itself. "Who's there?" Dr. Langston called out cautiously as she stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Behind her stood Jake and Timmy, gripping makeshift weapons fashioned from branches they'd collected along the way. Mr. Anderson lingered near the doorway, his face pale but determined. Emily turned slowly, her eyes meeting Dr. Langston's. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tension filling the air. Before anyone could respond, the radio emitted a sharp crackle, followed by a burst of static so loud it made everyone flinch. Then, clearer than ever before, Walter Hayes's voice spoke again, but this time it carried an unmistakable edge of panic. "They're here," he intoned, each word heavy with dread. "They've broken through." Before anyone could process the implications, the cabin shook violently as though struck by an earthquake. Books tumbled from shelves, and the wooden floor groaned ominously beneath their feet. In the corner of the room, a mirror hanging crookedly on the wall rippled like water, distorting reflections until they bore no resemblance to reality. From within the warped glass emerged shapes indistinct figures cloaked in shadow, their forms shifting unpredictably. Jake instinctively grabbed Timmy's arm, pulling him closer. "What are those things?" he stammered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Dr. Langston admitted, her scientific training momentarily overshadowed by raw fear. "But we need to shut down the radio. Now." Emily hesitated, her gaze fixed on the device as if entranced. "It's too late," she murmured. "They've already answered." Suddenly, one of the shadowy figures detached itself from the mirror, stepping fully into the room. Its presence radiated an oppressive weight, forcing everyone to take a step back. Though featureless, the entity exuded malice, its very existence seeming to drain the air of oxygen. More shapes followed suit, emerging not only from the mirror but also from the corners of the room, materializing as if summoned by some invisible command. Mr. Anderson raised his hand, attempting to shield himself and the others. "Stay back," he shouted, though his voice lacked conviction. The shadows paid him no heed, advancing steadily toward the group. In desperation, Dr. Langston lunged for the radio, fumbling with the dials in an effort to disrupt the frequency. Sparks flew as she twisted the knobs, creating bursts of static that temporarily drowned out Walter Hayes' voice. For a brief moment, the entities paused, their movements faltering as if disoriented. But the respite was short-lived. Soon enough, they resumed their approach, undeterred by the interference. Emily finally snapped out of her trance-like state, grabbing Dr. Langston's wrist. "Don't stop," she urged. "Keep trying. If we can sever the connection, maybe we'll stand a chance." Working together, the two women adjusted the radio settings methodically, guided by intuition rather than logic. Meanwhile, Jake and Timmy used their makeshift weapons to fend off the closest shadows, striking blindly at anything that came within reach. Their efforts proved futile. The entities moved with fluid grace, slipping past blows as though untouchable. Amidst the chaos, Mr. Anderson noticed something peculiar about the radio's wiring. Attached to one of the internal components was a small piece of paper bearing a handwritten note. "To close the gate, you must complete the cycle." Below the instruction were coordinates latitude and longitude that corresponded to a location deep within the forest surrounding Walter Hayes' farmhouse. Without hesitation, he shouted the information to the others. "There's a way to stop this. We have to go back to Illinois." Though skeptical, the group agreed there was no better option. With the radio in tow, they fled the cabin, pursued relentlessly by the shadowy figures. The journey ahead promised peril and uncertainty, but one thing remained clear. The answers they sought lay buried in the past, and perhaps the key to survival rested in completing the enigmatic cycle hinted at in Walter Hayes' cryptic message. They said this doll was cursed, but that's not the scariest part. The room seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy as Marcus and Emily pressed forward, determined to help Elizabeth. The whisper had confirmed their suspicions. She was bound not by malice but by fear, trapped between worlds due to the promise she'd made long ago. Now they faced the daunting task of breaking that vow without unleashing unforeseen consequences. Marcus adjusted his position, placing a hand on the table where Clara rested. His voice carried a mix of authority and compassion as he spoke directly into the void. "Elizabeth," he began, his tone measured yet firm. "We know you're here. We can feel your presence. It's time to let go." For several moments, silence reigned supreme. Then, like ripples spreading across water, the air around them began to shift. A faint glow emanated from Clara's porcelain body, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The temperature continued to drop, and Emily instinctively pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders. "I don't want to leave," came another whisper, this time tinged with desperation. It wasn't anger or hostility, it was pure terror. Elizabeth's spirit clung to the doll, not out of hatred, but because it represented safety, even in death. "It's okay," Emily found herself saying, her voice trembling but resolute. "You're safe now. You don't have to stay here anymore. Let us help you." The response was immediate. The glow intensified, illuminating the room in a ghostly light. Shadows flickered erratically, almost as if struggling against some invisible force. Marcus nodded encouragingly at Emily, signaling for her to continue. "You made a promise a long time ago," Emily said softly. "But promises aren't forever, Elizabeth. Sometimes, we need to break them so we can move on. Please, trust us." The response was immediate. The glow surrounding Clara flared brighter, momentarily blinding both Emily and Marcus. When their vision cleared, they saw something neither had expected: a translucent figure standing before them. It was a young girl, no older than 10, dressed in period clothing. Her wide eyes were filled with equal parts fear and hope. "Will it hurt?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Marcus replied gently. "It won't hurt, but you have to be brave. Are you ready?" Elizabeth hesitated, glancing down at Clara. For a moment, it seemed as though she might refuse. Then, slowly, she extended a hand toward the doll. As her fingers brushed against the porcelain surface, a wave of energy surged through the room, knocking over chairs and extinguishing the candles. When the chaos subsided, Clara lay motionless on the table, devoid of any supernatural aura. And Elizabeth, she was gone. Or so it seemed. As Emily and Marcus sat in stunned silence trying to process what had just transpired, a single candle flickered back to life in the corner of the room. Its flame danced wildly, casting strange patterns on the walls. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light steadied, leaving behind only the faintest trace of warmth. "She's free," Marcus said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever held her here is broken. She's moved on." Relief washed over Emily, mingling with exhaustion. She sank onto the couch, feeling the weight of the past few days lifting slightly from her shoulders. Yet beneath the surface, a lingering question remained unanswered. What exactly had happened to Elizabeth all those years ago? Had she truly made a pact with something beyond human understanding, or was there another explanation waiting to be uncovered? Over the following weeks, Emily and Marcus worked together to piece together the remaining fragments of Elizabeth's story. They scoured old church records, consulted historians, and even revisited the riverbank where she'd drowned. Along the way, they discovered hints of darker forces at play forces that suggested Elizabeth's deal hadn't been entirely voluntary. One particularly chilling discovery came from an ancient journal hidden away in the town archives. Written by a priest who had lived during Elizabeth's time, it detailed accounts of unnatural occurrences in Elmwood Heights. Among these entries was one mentioning a dark entity preying on vulnerable souls, offering false promises in exchange for eternal servitude. Could Elizabeth's promise have been part of a larger scheme? Or was she simply a victim caught in the crossfire of forces beyond comprehension? While they never found definitive answers, one thing became clear. Clara was more than just a cursed doll. She was a conduit, a relic tied to events far older and more sinister than anyone realized. By freeing Elizabeth, Emily and Marcus had disrupted a delicate balance, but whether that disruption would bring peace or unleash further chaos remained to be seen. In the end, Emily decided to donate Clara to a historical museum, ensuring the doll would remain under close supervision rather than falling into the wrong hands. Marcus returned to his investigations, vowing to dig deeper into the mysteries surrounding Elmwood Heights. And Emily? She moved on, carrying with her the knowledge that some stories are meant to be told and others are best left buried. But late at night, when the wind howled through the trees and the moon cast silvery light across her bedroom window, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still watching. Not maliciously, not threateningly, but with an unspoken curiosity, as if waiting patiently for the next chapter to unfold. I spent one night alone in a cemetery. Here's what recorded on my phone. It all started on a chilly October evening in 2019. The date was October 27th, just 3 days before Halloween. I still remember the exact moment when my curiosity got the better of me. My name is Alex Carter, and at that time I was living in the small town of Willow Creek, nestled in the heart of Ohio. It's one of those towns where everyone knows each other, and local legends are passed down from generation to generation. That particular night, I found myself standing at the entrance of St. Mary's Cemetery. The place had been abandoned for years, its once pristine grounds now overgrown with weeds and ivy. The iron gates creaked as the wind picked up, sending shivers down my spine even before I stepped inside. I had heard stories about this cemetery since I was a child, tales of a ghostly figure seen wandering among the tombstones after midnight, and strange lights that would appear in the distance. But what really drew me here was something different. Earlier that week, while exploring old newspaper archives online, I stumbled upon an article from 1982. It mentioned a series of unexplained disappearances in the area during the late 70s and early 80s. All the victims were last seen near this very cemetery. Some claimed they had heard laughter coming from the shadows just before vanishing without a trace. The air was thick with anticipation as I entered the cemetery at exactly 11:45 p.m. My phone's flashlight barely pierced through the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows across the weathered gravestones. The moon hung low in the sky, partially obscured by thin clouds that drifted lazily overhead. The temperature dropped noticeably as I ventured deeper into the labyrinth of tombs and mausoleums. I decided to record everything using my phone, hoping to capture some evidence of whatever supernatural phenomena people spoke about. As I walked, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustling of leaves despite the gentle breeze. It felt unnatural, almost as if the entire world held its breath waiting for something to happen. At precisely 12:15 a.m., I reached the oldest section of the cemetery, where many of the graves dated back to the mid-1800s. There stood a large marble angel statue, its face worn smooth by decades of exposure to the elements. According to legend, this was the spot where most sightings occurred. Standing there under the pale glow of my phone screen, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence. The soft click of heels against stone. It came from somewhere behind me but faded quickly into the distance. I turned around, scanning the area with my flashlight, yet saw nothing unusual. Still, my instincts told me to stay put and keep recording. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last until finally, at 12:37 a.m., I captured something extraordinary. On the video playback, you can clearly see a shadow moving between two tombstones far ahead. But here's the strange part. There shouldn't have been enough light for such distinct movement. And when I zoomed in later, I could make out a figure wearing what appeared to be an antique dress, her hair flowing freely in the non-existent wind. She seemed to be watching me intently before disappearing completely behind another headstone. By now, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Yet, instead of leaving immediately, I chose to follow the path she had taken. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though invisible forces resisted my progress. When I arrived at the location where she vanished, I discovered something unsettling. Fresh footprints pressed into the damp earth, leading toward the center of the cemetery. Following these tracks brought me to an open clearing surrounded by towering oaks, whose branches intertwined high above like skeletal fingers reaching for the heavens. In the middle of the clearing lay an ancient oak tree with a hollow trunk wide enough for someone to crawl inside. Curiosity overcoming fear, I approached cautiously, shining my light into the dark cavity within. Inside, I found remnants of burnt candles scattered around alongside pieces of torn fabric and strange symbols etched into the bark. They looked familiar somehow, reminding me of images I'd seen in books about occult practices. But before I could examine them further, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The wind howled louder now, carrying whispers that seemed to form words in a language I didn't recognize. Then, without warning, my phone battery died completely, plunging me into total darkness. As I stood there, unable to see anything beyond arm's length, panic began creeping in. The whispers grew louder, forming coherent sentences, though none made sense to me. Suddenly, I felt a cold presence brush past my shoulder, followed by a chilling laugh echoing through the clearing. Time seemed to stretch infinitely, as every second dragged on endlessly. Regaining composure slightly, I fumbled in my pocket for matches I always carried, just in case. After several failed attempts due to trembling hands, I managed to strike one against the box. The tiny flame illuminated only a small portion of my surroundings, but revealed enough to send shockwaves through my body. Surrounding the clearing were more figures, their silhouettes barely distinguishable amidst the encroaching darkness. They moved silently, circling the clearing much like predators stalking prey. One figure stepped forward, closer than the others. Its outline resembled that of a woman draped in tattered clothing reminiscent of Victorian fashion. Her face remained obscured, hidden beneath layers of fog-like substance swirling around her head. However, her eyes glowed faintly, piercing through the gloom with an intensity that sent chills coursing down my spine. Desperation fueled adrenaline, allowing clearer thinking, despite overwhelming terror. Using the match's remaining light, I located a loose rock nearby and prepared to defend myself should the situation escalate further. Meanwhile, the entity continued advancing slowly, maintaining eye contact while emitting guttural sounds akin to reversed speech patterns often associated with paranormal investigations. Moments later, another unexpected event unfolded. From the direction of the cemetery entrance came beams of light cutting through the dense veil of night. Shouts echoed faintly, growing louder as whoever approached drew nearer. Relief washed over me temporarily until realization struck. Entering such places alone wasn't wise, especially after witnessing phenomena defying explanation. Still unsure whether help arrived or additional complications manifested, I maintained vigilance, ready to act decisively regardless of outcome. The shouts grew louder, and soon I could make out voices calling my name. Alex Carter. It was Deputy Miller's voice, followed by the rustling of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave, but it was mixed with confusion. How did they know I was here? And why were they looking for me? I raised my voice, shouting back as loudly as I could, hoping they would hear me over the howling wind. Over here, I'm in the clearing. Within moments, flashlight beams pierced the darkness, illuminating the area around me. Deputy Miller appeared first, his face pale but determined. Behind him came two other officers, their expressions grim as they scanned the surroundings. The figures that had been circling me vanished almost instantly, leaving no trace behind except for an unsettling silence. "What are you doing here, Alex?" Deputy Miller asked, his tone both concerned and accusatory. "This place hasn't been safe since. Well, you know the history." I don't know," I stammered, still trying to process everything that had happened. I just wanted to see if there was any truth to the stories, but then I saw something, or someone. Miller exchanged a glance with one of the other officers before turning back to me. "Let's get you out of here. We'll talk about this later." As we made our way back toward the cemetery gates, I noticed something strange. The footprints I had followed earlier were gone, as if they had never existed. Even the disturbed earth around the ancient oak tree looked untouched, perfectly smooth as though nothing had ever disturbed it. My mind raced with questions, but I kept quiet, unsure of what to say. Back at the sheriff's station, Miller grilled me for hours, asking about every detail of my experience. He seemed particularly interested in the symbols I had found on the tree and the figure in the Victorian dress. When I mentioned the reversed speech patterns, he went completely silent, his expression unreadable. Later that night, after being released from questioning, I returned home, exhausted but unable to sleep. I replayed the video footage on my phone, zooming in on the shadowy figure I had captured. To my surprise, when I slowed down the playback, I could hear faint whispers in the background. They weren't random sounds, they formed words, though distorted and difficult to understand. One phrase stood out clearly: "You shouldn't have come." The next morning, I visited the local library, searching through old records and newspaper clippings related to St. Mary's Cemetery. That's when I discovered something chilling. In 1873, a young woman named Eleanor Whitmore disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her body was never found, but locals reported seeing her ghost wandering the cemetery late at night. According to the articles, she had worn a Victorian-era dress and had long flowing hair. Further digging revealed more disturbing details. Eleanor had been part of a secret occult group that practiced rituals in the cemetery's clearing. Their activities were believed to have caused a rift between worlds, allowing entities to cross over into ours. Some claimed these beings were responsible for the unexplained disappearances in the late 70s and early 80s. Armed with this new information, I returned to the sheriff's office, eager to share my findings with Deputy Miller. However, when I arrived, I was told he had taken a sudden leave of absence, citing personal reasons. His desk was cleared out, and none of the other officers seemed willing to discuss the case further. Days turned into weeks, and though I tried to put the incident behind me, it haunted me constantly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glowing eyes of the entity in the clearing, or heard the chilling laughter echoing through the dark. Then, one evening, while reviewing the video footage again, I noticed something I had missed before. In the corner of the screen, just before the battery died, there was a reflection in the lens of face peering directly at me. It wasn't the figure in the Victorian dress, it was someone else entirely. Someone who looked eerily familiar. My own face stared back at me, but it wasn't the Alex Carter I knew. This version of me wore a sinister smile, its eyes filled with malice. Before I could process what I was seeing, the image flickered and disappeared, leaving only static on the screen. That night, I packed my bags and left Willow Creek, never looking back. I haven't returned since, and I doubt I ever will. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers coming from my phone even when it's powered off. And occasionally, when I check the camera roll, I find new videos I don't remember recording. They always show the same thing: me standing alone in the cemetery, surrounded by shadows that move too quickly to be human. And in the background, the same chilling phrase repeats over and over: "You shouldn't have come." There's a secret message hidden in this old lullaby. Can you hear it? The whispers grew louder, forming a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from every direction. Emily clutched the box tightly, her knuckles white with tension. The torches lining the walls flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the narrow passageways. Each step she took echoed through the tunnels, blending with the eerie lullaby that now played in perfect harmony with the whispers. She reached a fork in the tunnel, unsure which path to take. To her left, the air smelled of damp earth and decay, while to her right, the scent of burning wood filled her nostrils. Instinctively, she chose the latter, following the trail of smoke until she emerged into a vast underground chamber. The room was illuminated by a massive fire pit at its center, casting an orange glow over the ancient symbols etched into the stone walls. In the middle of the chamber stood an altar, upon which rested a single objecta, small, intricately carved wooden doll. Its eyes were painted black, and it seemed to stare directly at Emily as if aware of her presence. She approached cautiously, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of ash covering the floor. As she drew closer, the doll's gaze became more intense, making her skin crawl. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled violently, causing her to stumble backward. From the shadows surrounding the chamber, figures began to emerge, men and women dressed in tattered robes, their faces obscured by hoods. They moved silently, forming a circle around the altar, leaving Emily trapped between them and the exit. One of the figures stepped forward, lowering their hood to reveal a gaunt face with hollow eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure said in a voice that sounded both male and female at the same time. "This place is not meant for outsiders." Emily swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "Who are you, and what does this have to do with my grandmother?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering whether to answer. "Your grandmother knew more than she let on," it replied cryptically. "She tried to stop it, but failed. Now, the cycle must continue." "What cycle?" Emily demanded, her frustration mounting. "And what does this doll have to do with anything?" The figure extended a bony hand toward the doll, and the flames in the fire pit flared higher, illuminating the room even brighter. "That doll is the key," it explained. "It holds the essence of the Watcher, bound within its confines for centuries. Your grandmother discovered this secret and attempted to destroy it, but instead she sealed it away, hoping no one would ever find it again." "But why me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Why am I here now?" The figure paused, glancing briefly at the others in the circle before returning its gaze to Emily. "Because you carry the mark," it whispered, reaching out to touch her forehead. Emily flinched but couldn't move away. Beneath the figure's fingertips, she felt a strange warmth spreading across her skin, followed by a sharp pain. When the figure removed its hand, Emily saw a faint scar etched into her skin, a symbol identical to those on the parchment she had found earlier. Her mind reeled as she processed what this meant. Was she somehow connected to the Watcher, or was she merely another pawn in a much larger game? Before she could ask further questions, the ground shook once more, this time with enough force to send everyone sprawling. The fire pit erupted into a wall of flames, blocking off any escape routes. The figures in the circle began chanting in unison, their words unintelligible yet unmistakably sinister. Emily backed away, clutching the box to her chest. She realized she had only one option: to use the items inside the box to fight back. Opening it hastily, she pulled out the locket, the key, and the parchment. The red symbols on the parchment glowed brighter, reacting to the energy in the room. Without thinking, she placed the key onto the parchment, aligning it with one of the symbols. Instantly, a blinding light erupted from the combination, forcing everyone in the chamber to shield their eyes. When the light faded, Emily found herself alone in the room, the figures and the altar gone. In their place stood a mirror-like surface, reflecting her image perfectly, but something was wrong. The reflection smiled wickedly, revealing sharp teeth that Emily didn't possess. "Welcome," the reflection said, its voice echoing within her mind. "I've been waiting for you." Emily froze, unsure whether to run or confront the entity staring back at her. The doll on the altar twitched slightly, as if alive, drawing her attention back to the center of the room. Slowly, she turned to face it, realizing that whatever happened next would determine not just her fate, but the fate of everyone connected to this cursed house. And so, the battle began not with weapons or brute force, but with secrets untold and truths hidden deep within the shadows of Willow Creek. Emily had unlocked a door that should have remained closed, and now there was no turning back. As the reflection continued to speak, its voice weaving through her thoughts like a venomous serpent, Emily felt her resolve harden. She remembered the journal entries, the warnings scribbled in desperation by her grandmother. There had to be a way to reverse whatever curse this was. But first, she needed to understand the full extent of what she was dealing with. The doll suddenly emitted a low hum, vibrating softly against the altar. Emily's heart raced as she noticed the black-painted eyes shifting, almost as if they were tracking her movements. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly approached the altar, her hand trembling as she reached for the doll. The moment her fingers brushed against its wooden surface, the room plunged into darkness. A cold wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the remaining embers of the fire pit. Emily could hear faint laughter echoing all around her, though she couldn't pinpoint its source. Panic set in, but she forced herself to remain calm. Using the glow of the still luminous parchment, she examined the doll more closely. Carved into its back was a series of runes that matched the ones on the parchment. It was as if the doll itself held answers if only she could decipher them. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. Spinning around, she saw the shadowy figure from earlier reappearing, though this time it wasn't alone. More hooded figures materialized out of the darkness, encircling her once again. Their chanting resumed, louder and more insistent than before. "You cannot win," the lead figure intoned, stepping closer. "The Watcher has chosen you. Resistance is futile." Emily gritted her teeth, refusing to give in to fear. Clutching the box and the parchment tightly, she focused on the symbols glowing faintly in her hands. If her grandmother had managed to seal the Watcher away once, perhaps there was a way to do it again. But time was running out, and the stakes were higher than ever. What lay ahead was far worse than anything she could have imagined. The man next door vanished, but left behind a diary that chills me to the bone. It all started on a quiet Tuesday evening in March 2021. The neighborhood of Willow Creek, located just outside Portland, Oregon, was known for its friendly residents and picturesque streets lined with maple trees. For years, everything seemed normal until the man next door disappeared. His name was Thomas Grayson, a reclusive writer who kept mostly to himself. He lived alone in a modest two-story house at 14 Elmwood Avenue, directly adjacent to my family's home. We had never spoken much beyond polite nods or the occasional wave when our paths crossed in the yard. Still, there was always something about him that felt off. Maybe it was the way he would stare into space during those rare moments we exchanged pleasantries, his eyes distant as if lost in another world entirely. Or perhaps it was the faint scent of burning incense that drifted over from his property every now and then, mingling strangely with the fresh air of spring mornings. The first sign that something was wrong came late one night. I was working on some paperwork in my study when I heard what sounded like muffled screams coming from across the fence. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. It wasn't uncommon for wind to carry odd noises through these parts, but the sound persisted, growing louder before abruptly cutting off. My curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped outside and made my way toward Thomas's house. The front porch light was off, which struck me as unusual since he usually left it on even after dark. As I approached, an unsettling feeling crept over me, a sensation akin to being watched, though no one appeared to be around. Peering through the living room window, I saw nothing but shadows cast by moonlight filtering through the curtains. When I knocked on the door, there was no answer. Concerned, I tried turning the handle only to find it unlocked. Pushing it open cautiously, I called out, "Mr. Grayson, are you here?" Silence greeted me in return. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive. Every surface seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though the very walls were alive. The air smelled damp, mixed with traces of sulfur and odor I couldn't quite place, but knew instinctively wasn't natural. Moving further into the house, I noticed small details that hinted at Thomas's abrupt departure. A coffee mug still warm on the kitchen counter, pages scattered across the dining table, each filled with frantic handwriting, and most disturbingly, a diary propped open on the bedside table in his bedroom. Curiosity overwhelmed caution as I picked up the journal. Its leather cover was worn, almost brittle, and bore strange symbols etched into the corners. Inside, the entries spanned several months, chronicling events leading up to his disappearance. Each page revealed more about Thomas than I ever imagined possible, and painted a picture far darker than I could have anticipated. I can't shake the feeling that they're watching me. It started last week, whispers in the dead of night, soft enough to dismiss as mere imagination, until I realized they followed me everywhere. Outside my window, behind closed doors, even inside my own head. They call my name sometimes, their voices low and raspy, like old men choking on dust. but when I turn, no one is there. At first, I thought it might be stress. Writing deadlines, sleepless nights, maybe I'm losing my mind. Then, I found them the marks. Carved into the bark of the ancient oak tree in my backyard, they look like runes or hieroglyphs. I don't recognize them, but they pulse faintly under certain lights, almost glowing. If I concentrate hard enough, I swear I hear whispers emanating from them. What am I getting myself into? As I read, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. These weren't just random thoughts scribbled down in haste. They were deliberate records of escalating terror. By April, Thomas's entries grew increasingly erratic, detailing encounters with shadowy figures lurking near his windows, footsteps echoing through empty hallways, and dreams so vivid they blurred the line between reality and nightmare. One entry stood out in particular. Tonight, I saw it. Not just the shadows, they've been part of my life for weeks now, but it, whatever it is, it manifested fully for the first time while I sat writing at my desk. A figure emerged from the corner of the room, tall and gaunt, its face obscured by darkness. Its presence radiated cold, freezing the air around me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only watch as it leaned closer, whispering words too ancient to comprehend. Then it vanished, leaving behind a single word scrawled in red ink on the wall. Remember. Is this madness? Am I hallucinating? Or has something truly evil taken root in my home? By the time I reached the final pages, my hands trembled. The last entry dated back to May 3rd, barely legible due to the urgency with which it was written. They know I'm onto them. The whispers have grown louder, insistent now, demanding sacrifices I refuse to make. Last night, I caught glimpses of movement outside my window. Dozens of shapes gathering beneath the oak tree, forming a circle around it. When I went to investigate, they turned their heads in unison, staring straight at me with hollow eyes. One stepped forward, pointing a finger directly at my chest. If I survive this, I'll burn everything. Every book, every ritual guide, every cursed artifact I foolishly brought into my home. Until then, I must endure your escape. That was where the diary ended. No explanation, no resolution, just silence. Shaking off the chill running down my spine, I placed the journal back where I'd found it and began searching the rest of the house for clues. In the basement, I discovered an altar-like setup surrounded by candles, ashes, and remnants of what looked like burnt paper. Symbols identical to those carved into the oak tree covered the walls, some smudged as though hastily erased. But the most alarming discovery awaited me upstairs. Hidden beneath Thomas's bed was a locked wooden box. After fumbling with the latch for several minutes, I managed to pry it open, revealing its contents. Photographs of local landmarks, newspaper clippings about missing persons cases dating back decades, and a folded map marked with X's corresponding to specific locations throughout Willow Creek. Before I could examine the items further, the lights flickered violently, plunging the house into darkness. A low growl echoed through the halls, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. Panic surged within me, urging me to flee. Grabbing the box and diary, I sprinted out of the house, locking the door behind me as I ran. Back at my own home, I barricaded myself inside, heart pounding as I replayed the events of the evening in my mind. Something unnatural lingered within Thomas Grayson's house, and whatever it was, it hadn't finished with him yet. Now, days later, I sit here writing this account, piecing together fragments of information from the diary and other sources. The photos and maps hint at a pattern connecting Thomas's disappearance to others in the area, people who vanished without a trace, their homes left eerily intact like his. Could there be a larger force at play? One responsible for all these vanishings? And why does the phrase "remember" keep haunting me? As dawn breaks outside, I realize I may not have long to uncover the truth. Whatever happened to Thomas, whatever drove him to write those chilling entries, feels dangerously close to finding me next. The whispers begin again. soft at first, then louder, filling the room with echoes of a language I don't understand. My skin prickles as I glance toward the window, catching sight of movement beyond the glass. Shadows gather, forming silhouettes that mimic human forms, their hollow eyes fixed on mine. Determined to unravel the mystery, I spent the following days poring over the contents of the box Thomas had hidden. Among the newspaper clippings were articles spanning nearly 50 years, each detailing a similar case. Individuals who vanished mysteriously from their homes, leaving behind no evidence of struggle or abduction. What connected them, however, was the location of their disappearances. All occurred near ancient oak trees scattered throughout Willow Creek. One article caught my attention in particular. Dated back to 1978, it described a group of teenagers who claimed to have witnessed strange ceremonies conducted beneath one such tree during a full moon. According to their testimony, hooded figures chanted in an unknown tongue, circling the base of the tree while holding lit torches. The teens fled in terror, but upon returning the next morning, they found the ground scorched and the tree bearing markings identical to those Thomas had documented in his diary. Could these rituals still be taking place? And if so, who or what was performing them? My investigation led me to the oldest resident in Willow Creek, Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker, a retired librarian with a wealth of knowledge about the town's history. She listened intently as I recounted my findings, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "The oaks," she murmured, her voice tinged with unease. "They've always been sacred sites for the indigenous tribes that once inhabited this land. Legends say they serve as gateways between worlds, places where the veil between reality and the supernatural thins." She paused, choosing her words carefully. In the past, settlers misinterpreted these beliefs, using the trees for their own twisted purposes. Rituals performed beneath them often invoked entities best left undisturbed. Some believe those spirits remain trapped, feeding on fear and suffering to sustain themselves. Her warning sent shivers down my spine. If Thomas had unknowingly stumbled upon one of these portals, it explained both his fascination with the oak tree in his yard and the horrors he documented in his diary. But what did it mean for me? Had I inadvertently drawn attention to myself by delving into his secrets? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window set my nerves on edge. Around midnight, the whispers returned, this time clearer, more urgent. They weren't random sounds anymore, they formed coherent phrases, though spoken in a language I didn't recognize. Leaning closer to the window, I strained to decipher their meaning. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Frost spread across the glass in intricate patterns resembling the symbols carved into the oak tree. My breath hitched as I watched the frost take shape, forming letters that spelled out a single word: come. Fear gripped me, but so did resolve. If I wanted answers, I needed to confront whatever force lay behind these events. Armed with flashlights and recordings devices, I ventured into the woods behind my house, following the map Thomas had left behind. It guided me to an ancient oak tree standing alone in a clearing, its massive branches twisting skyward like skeletal fingers. As I approached, the air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, coalescing into humanoid forms that surrounded the tree. Their hollow eyes glowed faintly, reflecting a malevolent intelligence. Despite my terror, I forced myself to step closer, examining the markings etched into the bark. They pulsed faintly, as though alive, and emitted a low hum that resonated deep within my skull. Then, from somewhere within the tree, a voice spoke not aloud, but directly in my mind. It carried a tone of authority, laced with menace. "You should not have come here," it intoned. "Your kind meddles where it does not belong. Leave now, or suffer the consequences." I hesitated, torn between fleeing and pressing further. Before I could decide, the ground beneath me trembled violently, throwing me off balance. Roots erupted from the earth, snaking toward me with startling speed. Panic surged through me as I scrambled backward, narrowly avoiding their grasp. But the tree wasn't done. From its trunk emerged a figure unlike anything I'd ever seen, a towering entity draped in tattered robes, its face obscured by a mask of jagged wood. It raised its arms and the surrounding shadows converged, forming a barrier that blocked my path to safety. Trapped, I turned back to face the creature, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever it was, it had answers and I intended to get them, even if it meant risking everything. I watched a security camera footage that shouldn't exist. Watch until the end. It was a quiet evening in early November 2018 when Ethan Carter, a night shift security guard at the Portland General Hospital in Oregon, stumbled upon something that would change his life forever. The hospital had recently installed new surveillance cameras to monitor its parking lot and surrounding areas more effectively. As part of his routine duties, Ethan spent most of his shift reviewing footage from these cameras, ensuring everything remained secure. At around 3:47 a.m., while scrolling through the day's recordings, Ethan noticed an unfamiliar timestamp on one of the files labeled Camera 7. The file indicated it was recorded on October 30, honest, 1986, a date long before the hospital even existed in its current location. Curious, but dismissing it as a glitch, he clicked play, expecting nothing more than static or corrupted video. Instead, what unfolded on the screen left him frozen in disbelief. The footage showed the same parking lot where Ethan worked, though it looked drastically different, darker, emptier, with outdated cars parked haphazardly. A figure walked slowly across the frame, their face obscured by shadows. They moved unnaturally, dragging their feet as if weighed down by something invisible. Ethan rewound the clip multiple times, trying to make sense of what he saw. Each time, the figure appeared identical, a man dressed in a tattered suit, his head tilted slightly downward. Ethan decided to investigate further, logging into the hospital's database to cross-reference any records from 1986. To his surprise, there were no entries for Camera 7 prior to its installation in 2015. Yet here was undeniable proof that the camera had somehow captured images decades earlier. His mind raced with questions. How was this possible, and why did the footage exist now? By 4:12 a.m., Ethan's curiosity turned into unease. He reached for his phone, intending to call his supervisor, Mr. Harris, but stopped mid-dial. Something about the situation felt wrong, not just eerie, but dangerous. Before he could act, the intercom system crackled to life without anyone activating it. A low, distorted voice whispered, "You shouldn't have watched." Ethan dropped his phone, his heart pounding against his chest. The room temperature plummeted, and frost began forming on the glass of the monitors in front of him. He grabbed his jacket, ready to flee, but hesitated when another message flashed across the screen. Watch until the end. Reluctantly, Ethan obeyed, pressing play again. This time, the footage revealed details he hadn't noticed before. In the background, behind the shadowy figure, stood a young woman wearing a white dress. Her hair hung loosely over her face, obscuring her features, but her posture suggested she wasn't walking willingly. She seemed to be dragged toward the edge of the frame, vanishing abruptly as if stepping off a cliff. The scene shifted suddenly, cutting to black for several seconds before returning to the same location. But now, the parking lot was filled with dozens of people, all standing perfectly still. Their faces pointed directly at the camera, yet none blinked or moved. Ethan leaned closer, squinting to identify them, when the image froze entirely. On the screen, every single person turned their heads simultaneously, locking their gaze on the viewer. Before Ethan could react, the power cut out completely, plunging the control room into darkness. Panic set in as he fumbled for his flashlight, illuminating the space just enough to confirm he was alone. But the silence outside told a different story. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. 2 days later, news spread throughout the hospital about Ethan's disappearance. Surveillance tapes from the night of November 3rd showed him entering the control room but never leaving. Investigators recovered the mysterious footage from camera 7, along with additional clips Ethan hadn't seen. These new recordings depicted scenes from various dates spanning the late 1970s to the early 1990s, all taking place in locations that no longer existed. Among the recovered files was a handwritten note found near Ethan's desk. It read simply, "They're watching us." Meanwhile, in Elmwood, Illinois, a retired police officer named Robert Gray became increasingly obsessed with solving cold cases involving missing persons. One particular case haunted him: the disappearance of a nurse named Clara Hayes in 1986. According to reports, Clara vanished without a trace after working her final shift at a small medical clinic located near the present-day site of Portland General Hospital. Coincidentally, the clinic closed down shortly after her disappearance, leaving behind only rumors and unanswered questions. Robert dug deeper, uncovering old photographs and documents related to the clinic. Among them was a blueprint showing the exact layout of the building, and strangely, it included plans for a basement level that wasn't mentioned in official records. Intrigued, Robert contacted Dr. Margaret Langston, a paranormal researcher based in Seattle who had previously consulted on similar cases involving anomalous technology. Dr. Langston arrived in Elmwood in April 2022, bringing along equipment designed to detect electromagnetic anomalies. Together, they explored the abandoned property where the clinic once stood. Beneath layers of dirt and debris, they discovered remnants of the hidden basementa concrete staircase leading deep underground. Inside, they found remnants of outdated electronics, including parts resembling those used in modern surveillance systems. One device caught their attention: a circular panel embedded in the wall, covered in strange symbols etched into the metal surface. When activated, the panel emitted a faint hum, followed by a series of clicks reminiscent of Morse code. Deciphering the pattern led them to a specific frequency, 612 kHz. Back in Portland, investigators pieced together fragments of Ethan's last moments. Forensic analysis revealed fingerprints on the recovered footage belonging to someone other than Ethan or any known staff member. DNA tests failed to match the sample against existing databases, raising suspicions about what had tampered with the evidence. In May 2023, Dr. Langston connected the dots between the Portland hospital's mysterious footage and the findings in Elmwood. She theorized that certain frequencies acted as gateways to alternate timelines or dimensions, allowing glimpses into past events that shouldn't logically coexist. However, she warned that prolonged exposure to such phenomena risked attracting unwanted attention from entities trapped within these overlapping realities. Robert agreed to test her hypothesis, setting up a portable transmitter tuned to 612 kHz inside the old clinic's basement. At precisely midnight, the device crackled to life, playing static-laden whispers that grew louder with each passing minute. Suddenly, the room filled with cold air, and shadows danced erratically across the walls. From the corner of the room emerged a faint silhouette woman in a white dress, her face obscured by tangled hair. "Clara?" Robert called out, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but continued advancing steadily toward them. Behind her, more shapes materialized, their forms shifting unpredictably. Dr. Langston attempted to deactivate the transmitter, but the device refused to power down. Realizing they couldn't escape, the pair braced themselves for whatever came next. As dawn broke over Elmwood, search teams discovered the abandoned clinic engulfed in flames, its structure reduced to ashes. No bodies were recovered, though scattered among the ruins were pages torn from a journal belonging to Clara Hayes. Written in frantic handwriting, the entries described visions of a world consumed by darkness, populated by beings who whispered secrets meant to drive her mad. And so, the mystery deepened, connecting lives separated by decades and miles. What lay beyond the veil of reality, and how far would those involved go to uncover the truth or survive the consequences? Inside the charred remains of the clinic, a single surveillance camera still functioned, transmitting live footage to an unknown recipient. On the screen, the words scrolled silently. Watch until the end. I recorded my bedroom for one night. What I heard still gives me chills. It was a quiet evening in March 2021 when Alex Carter, a 28-year-old software developer living in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, decided to experiment with his new digital voice recorder. The device had been sitting unused on his desk for weeks, purchased during one of those late-night Amazon binges that often followed long hours of coding. That night, however, something felt different off-even, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in his small apartment. The apartment itself was nothing special. 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a tiny balcony overlooking a busy street. Alex had moved in just 6 months prior, drawn by its affordability and proximity to work. But lately, strange things had been happening. Doors would creak open by themselves. Faint whispers seemed to drift through the walls at night, and occasionally, he'd hear soft footsteps outside his bedroom door when no one else was home. At first, he dismissed it as old building quirks or overactive imagination, but the occurrences grew more frequent and unsettling. That particular Friday night, after finishing up a particularly grueling project deadline, Alex decided to test out the recorder. He placed it on his bedside table, set it to record continuously, and left it running overnight. His plan was simple: capture any unusual sounds that might explain what he'd been hearing. Then, exhausted from the week's workload, he turned off the lights and climbed into bed. The next morning, Alex woke up groggy but curious. He retrieved the recorder and plugged it into his laptop, eager to review the audio. As the playback began, all he heard were the usual nighttime noises: distant traffic, occasional creaks of the floorboards, and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Nothing too out of the ordinary, at least not at first. But then, around 3:14 a.m., the tone changed. A faint rustling sound came through the speakers, almost like fabric being dragged across the floor. Alex paused the recording, rewound it, and listened again. This time, he noticed something else: a low whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It sounded distorted, as if coming from far away, yet it sent shivers down his spine. He continued listening, heart pounding faster with each passing second. The whispers grew louder, clearer, until they formed words, or rather, fragments of words. They weren't spoken in English, though. The language was unfamiliar, guttural, and unsettling. Suddenly, there was a sharp knock against the wall, followed by a chilling childlike giggle that echoed eerily before fading into silence. Alex stopped the playback immediately, staring at the screen in disbelief. Had he really just recorded that, or was it some kind of glitch? To be sure, he replayed the segment multiple times, confirming that the sounds were indeed real. His mind raced with questions. What or who had made those noises? And why did it feel so personal? Determined to get to the bottom of this, Alex spent the rest of the day researching paranormal phenomena online. He stumbled upon forums filled with stories similar to his own, people claiming to have captured unexplainable sounds using basic recording equipment. Some suggested leaving offerings or performing rituals to appease whatever entity might be present, while others warned him to stop meddling altogether. None of these answers satisfied him, though. He needed concrete evidence, not speculation. That evening, Alex decided to try another experiment. This time, he positioned 3 additional recorders throughout the apartment, one in the hallway, one in the living room, and another near the front door. He also placed a camera on a tripod in his bedroom, aiming it directly at the doorway. If anything happened that night, he wanted to catch it on both audio and video. As midnight approached, Alex lay awake, unable to sleep. Every little noise, the hum of the air conditioner, the rustle of leaves out, seemed amplified in his mind. Finally, exhaustion took over, and he drifted off, leaving the devices running. When he woke up the following morning, the first thing he did was check the recordings. The hallway and living room devices picked up nothing unusual, but the one in his bedroom told a different story. Around 2:57 a.m., the same eerie laughter from the previous night could be heard, only this time it was accompanied by something else, a rhythmic tapping sound, like fingers drumming against wood. Then, without warning, the laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep growl that reverberated through the room. Alex froze, rewinding the clip repeatedly to make sure he wasn't imagining things. The growl sounded primal, animalistic, and utterly terrifying. It was followed by a series of muffled thuds, as though someone or something was pacing back and forth. Turning his attention to the camera footage, Alex discovered something even stranger. For most of the night, the video showed nothing out of the ordinary. But during the exact moments when the growls occurred, the image flickered slightly, as if disrupted by an invisible force. More alarmingly, a shadowy figure appeared briefly in the corner of the frame, standing motionless near the doorway before vanishing completely. Alex sat back in his chair, stunned. Whatever was haunting his apartment wasn't imaginary, it was real, and it seemed to be growing bolder. Over the next few days, Alex documented every strange occurrence meticulously. The noises continued. More whispers, more laughter, more inexplicable sounds, but now they were joined by physical manifestations. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and once he even caught a glimpse of a fleeting shadow darting past the bathroom mirror. Desperate for help, Alex reached out to a local paranormal investigator named Marcus Kane, whose YouTube channel featured dozens of videos exploring haunted locations across the Pacific Northwest. To his surprise, Marcus agreed to visit the apartment, intrigued by the detailed logs Alex provided. On the appointed evening, Marcus arrived carrying an array of specialized equipment, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and even a Ouija board. Together, they set up shop in Alex's living room, reviewing the recordings and discussing potential explanations. Marcus listened intently, nodding along as Alex recounted everything that had happened since the initial recording. "I've seen cases like this before," Marcus admitted cautiously. "Sometimes, entities attach themselves to specific places or objects. Other times, they're drawn to certain individuals. Based on what you've described, it sounds like we're dealing with something intelligent and possibly malevolent." Before Alex could respond, the EMF detector began beeping wildly, its needle swinging erratically. Both men exchanged uneasy glances, then followed the readings to the hallway, where the device pointed toward Alex's bedroom door. Slowly, Marcus opened it, revealing a scene that neither of them expected. Inside, the temperature had dropped noticeably, creating a thick layer of condensation on the walls. The air smelled stale, almost suffocating. In the center of the room stood the tripod holding the camera, tilted slightly downward as if disturbed. Beneath it lay a single object Alex didn't recognize, a small, ornate box carved with intricate patterns. "What is that?" Marcus asked, pointing to the box. Alex shook his head, equally confused. "I've never seen it before. It wasn't here yesterday." Marcus carefully picked up the box, examining it closely. These symbols, they look ancient, almost ritualistic. He flipped it open, revealing several items inside. A fragment of blackened candle wax, a strand of hair, and a folded piece of paper covered in handwritten text. Before either man could read the note, the lights in the apartment began flickering uncontrollably. A cold breeze swept through the room despite all the windows being closed. Alex felt a presence behind him and turned quickly, but no one was there. Instead, he saw the camera lens reflecting an image that shouldn't have been possible, a pair of glowing red eyes staring straight at him. And then, the real nightmare began. Let's begin. I opened the locked room in my house. You won't believe what I found inside. It was a quiet evening in October when everything changed. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the small town of Willow Creek. nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains. The air carried a crisp chill that hinted at winter's approach, and the faint rustling of leaves outside my window added to the serene yet unsettling atmosphere. I lived alone in an old Victorian house inherited from my late grandmother, a place filled with memories, but also secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? At around 8:00 p.m., as I sat by the fireplace flipping through one of her old photo albums, something caught my attention. A key rested quietly between the pages of the album, its brass surface tarnished with age. Curiosity bubbled up inside me. Where did this key belong? My grandmother never mentioned anything about it during her lifetime. After some thought, I decided to investigate further. The house itself was vast, with many rooms left untouched for years. One room, however, stood out a locked door on the second floor that I had always avoided opening. There was something about it, something eerie. But now, holding the mysterious key, I felt compelled to face whatever lay beyond that door. Taking a deep breath, I climbed the creaking wooden staircase, each step echoing softly in the stillness of the night. As I reached the second floor, the dim light from the hallway barely illuminated the corridor. My heart pounded against my chest as I inserted the key into the lock. With a soft click, the door opened slowly, revealing a dusty room shrouded in darkness. Inside, the air smelled musty, like forgotten books and aged wood. Moonlight streamed through a single cracked window, casting pale streaks across the floor. In the center of the room stood an antique dresser, its surface scratched and worn. Beside it, an old rocking chair swayed gently, despite there being no breeze. This sight sent a shiver down my spine. How could it be moving? I paused here, letting the tension build before continuing. Approaching the dresser cautiously, I opened the top drawer. Inside, I found stacks of yellowed letters tied together with fraying string. Carefully untying them, I began to read. Each letter told a haunting tale of a man named Henry, who once lived in this very house over a century ago. He spoke of strange occurrences, noises in the walls, footsteps in empty hallways, and whispers coming from nowhere. His words painted a picture of paranoia and fear, culminating in his disappearance without a trace. As I finished reading the last letter, a sudden noise startled me. It came from behind the dresser, a low groaning sound, almost like breathing. My mind raced. Should I leave, or should I press on? Gathering my courage, I moved the heavy dresser aside to reveal a hidden compartment carved into the wall. Inside, I discovered a journal belonging to Henry himself. Flipping through its brittle pages, I learned the truth. Henry believed he wasn't alone in the house, that another presence shared his life. He described encounters with a shadowy figure that would appear briefly in mirrors, doors locking themselves, and objects moving without explanation. Over time, these events drove him mad, leading to his eventual vanishing act. Just as I closed the journal, the lights in the room flickered violently. Shadows danced along the walls, distorting their shapes into something far more sinister. Panic set in as the rocking chair resumed its motion, faster this time, accompanied by faint murmurs that grew louder with every passing second. I knew then that I wasn't imagining things. I truly wasn't alone. Summoning every ounce of bravery, I grabbed the journal and ran downstairs, slamming the door shut behind me. Breathing heavily, I leaned against the front door, staring out into the darkened yard where nothing stirred except for the wind. For hours, I sat there, replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. Later that night, as I tried to sleep, I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, and every whisper of the wind seemed to carry a message meant only for me. That night, I realized that some mysteries are better left unsolved. And though I have since left the house, I often wonder if Henry's spirit still lingers there, trapped forever in the confines of those ancient walls. The next morning brought little relief. Dawn broke over Willow Creek, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, but the beauty of the sunrise couldn't erase the unease I felt. I spent most of the day pacing around the house, glancing nervously at the locked door on the second floor. Part of me wanted to confront whatever was inside again, while another part urged caution. By noon, curiosity won out. Armed with a flashlight and the journal, I returned to the room. This time, I examined the space more thoroughly. Alongside the dresser and rocking chair, there was an old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. Its silvered glass was clouded with age, making it difficult to see any reflection clearly. Yet, as I stood before it, I noticed something odd. When I moved to the left, the figure in the mirror hesitated, then followed suit, but too slowly, as if delayed by seconds. My pulse quickened. Was this just my imagination playing tricks on me, or was there truly something else present? I stepped back, observing the mirror carefully. Again, the figure mirrored my movements, but with that same unnatural delay. It was as if it weren't entirely real. I turned away from the mirror, focusing instead on the other items in the room. On the desk near the window, I spotted a stack of newspapers dating back to the early 1900s. Among them was an article about Henry's disappearance. According to the report, he vanished one stormy night after claiming to hear voices calling his name from the attic. Nobody was ever found, and the case went cold. This revelation unsettled me even further. If Henry truly disappeared under such circumstances, what became of him? And why did his belongings remain untouched in this room? As the afternoon wore on, I ventured into the attic, hoping to uncover more clues. The ladder leading up creaked ominously under my weight, and the air grew colder with each step. Upstairs, the attic was cluttered with boxes, furniture covered in dust sheets, and cobwebs stretching between rafters. Amidst the chaos, I found another journal, this one written by a woman named Eleanor. Eleanor's writings revealed she was Henry's sister. She detailed her own experiences with the supernatural phenomena in the house, describing how their parents had died mysteriously when they were children. Both siblings claimed to hear whispers in the night, sometimes calling their names, other times speaking in languages neither understood. Eleanor believed the house itself was cursed, built atop land sacred to Native American tribes who had been forcibly removed centuries earlier. Her final entry was chilling. Written hastily, it described a night when both siblings saw a black mist seeping through the cracks in the walls. The mist coalesced into shapes, faces, hands reaching out and surrounded them until they lost consciousness. Eleanor ended her journal abruptly, writing only, "It's coming back." With this new information, I began piecing together the puzzle. The house wasn't merely haunted, it seemed to be a conduit for something darker, something tied to its history. But what exactly was it? And why did it choose to reveal itself to me now? Over the following days, strange occurrences multiplied. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and the rocking chair upstairs continued its unnerving swaying. One evening, I recorded audio throughout the house, hoping to capture evidence of the activity. Listening to the playback later, I heard faint voices whispering unintelligible phrases. At one point, a voice clearly said, "Leave." Despite the warnings, I pressed on. Using salt and chalk, I drew protective circles in various parts of the house, attempting to ward off whatever force lingered within. These efforts seemed to work temporarily, but the entities always found ways to break through. One fateful night, I decided to spend the entire evening in the locked room upstairs. Equipped with a camera, audio recorder, and flashlight, I settled into the corner furthest from the rocking chair. Hours passed uneventfully until midnight struck. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply and the air grew thick with an oppressive heaviness. The rocking chair began to move again, faster than ever before. Shadows danced along the walls, taking forms that resembled human figures. Then, the mirror above the dresser lit up, glowing faintly despite the lack of electricity. Within its depths, I saw not my reflection, but a swirling vortex of darkness. From within, a voice emerged, not a whisper, but a guttural growl that reverberated through the room. Who dares disturb us? I froze, unable to respond. The voice continued, taunting me, questioning my intentions. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there, paralyzed by fear. Finally, the light in the mirror faded, and the room returned to its previous state. Exhausted and shaken, I fled the house, vowing never to return. This town disappeared overnight, but something still lives there. It was a crisp October evening in 2018 when the small town of Eldridge Hollow, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, experienced an event that would forever alter its history. The population had dwindled over the years to just under 300 residents, most of whom were descendants of the original settlers from the early 19th century. Life there was simple, quiet, and predictable until the night everything vanished. The date was October 17th, 2018. A local farmer named Jacob Monroe noticed something peculiar as he drove home after checking on his livestock around midnight. His headlights illuminated a thick fog rolling down the mountain, unlike anything he'd ever seen before. It wasn't the usual mist common to the area. This one seemed alive, swirling and twisting like some kind of sentient entity. Curiosity got the better of him, so he decided to investigate further despite his better judgment telling him otherwise. He parked his truck near the edge of town where Main Street began and stepped out into the cold air. The silence was unnerving. No crickets, no wind rustling through the trees, nothing but the sound of his own breathing. As Jacob approached the first house, he realized it was completely dark inside, even though he knew for a fact Mr. and Mrs. Peterson always left their porch light on at night. Intrigued, he walked up to the front door and knocked loudly. There was no answer. Jacob tried the handle, which turned surprisingly easily, considering how protective the elderly couple usually were about locking their doors. Stepping inside cautiously, he called out, "Mr. Peterson? Mrs. Peterson?" There was still no response. What greeted him instead was an eerie scene. Dinner sat half-eaten on the table. A television droned softly in the living room. And personal belongings lay scattered carelessly across the floor, as if someone had been in a hurry to leave. But they hadn't. Puzzled, Jacob returned outside only to find the same situation repeated throughout the entire town. Every single resident had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only their possessions and unfinished tasks. No signs of struggle, no evidence of abduction or natural disaster. It was as though the people of Eldridge Hollow had simply ceased to exist. Local authorities arrived shortly afterward following Jacob's frantic call, but even with extensive searches using helicopters, drones, and ground teams, not a single person could be found. By morning, news outlets picked up the story, dubbing it the vanishing of Eldridge Hollow. Speculation ran rampant. Theories ranged from alien abduction